You guys were involved too with Nutrisystem. I mean, I was the longest serving member of the board there. We took it from 72 cents a share to finally sold it at $42.
My guest on this episode is Brian Tierney. Brian is the founder and CEO of Brian Communications, and over a 25-year career, he's represented global brands like Comcast, Deloitte, Uber. He's also led an investor group that acquired the Philadelphia Inquirer. And during that time as publisher, they earned a Pulitzer Prize. Brian has played an amazing role in bringing the World Cup to Philadelphia, the Pope to Philadelphia, and these are the two biggest events in the history of Philadelphia. And Brian's been in the middle of it all, building relationships, making things happen in Philadelphia, and quite frankly, all across the country. And if you don't know Brian, you're going to get a great chance to meet someone who I would call a friend, a supporter, and someone who's been in the trenches with us over the years. And I'm really excited about this conversation. Brian, welcome to the 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show.
Thank you, Wayne. It's fun to be here and to be a part of this. And when I think back sometimes about the history, and in the fact that I'm 23 and you're 19 now. Oh yeah, right. Anyway, times three. But anyway, but it is fun to think about kind of where things began and where I am now.
Well, it's crazy. As you say that, we both are alums of the great Widener University School of Law, which is now Delaware Law School. And, we met back in the late 90s. This was the first time that we met. And I'll never forget about our breakfast meeting that we had at the Radnor Hotel in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you had just recently sold your business and your name, which we'll get into. And there's been so many things that you've been involved with. Talk about, some of the, what are some of the things that have made you successful as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, as a business person?
I'll start kind of going back, and sometimes when I think back in my life, I realized what happened in first grade was kind of a big moment. My mom was a waitress at the Bellevue. My dad worked for the insurance company of North America, which is the INA and Cigna now. He was a claims adjuster, later had a glass shop called Garrett Glass in Upper Darby. But when I was in first grade, I ran for class president. Mom helped me with my poster. And I came home that day and she said, Brian, how did it go? And I said, I didn't win. Michael won. It was one of my classmates. And she said, well, Brian, I'm so glad you tried. And she gave me a hug. And about 5 minutes later, she looked at me and she said, Brian, who did you vote for? And I said, well, Mom, I felt kind of funny voting for myself. So I voted for Michael, too. And she kissed me and said, Brian, if you don't vote for yourself in life, why should someone else? You have to vote for yourself if you have confidence in it. And I remember thinking, that's an interesting. So cut to, that's part of my life going forward, including when I'm 17 years old, my parents get a mailer that the Democrats are looking for somebody to run for township commissioner. I'm still in high school. And I said to my mom and dad, I turn 18 next month. The election's 2 months later. So maybe I'll run for township commissioner. So the first time I could vote in history, when I was 18 years old, I was able to vote for myself. I got about 36% of the vote. But, and so that's been kind of part of it. It's lots of times I call it, basically systemic optimism, existential optimism, whatever, like being practical, but also thinking about what, everybody will tell you what can happen. And I appreciate that. And you want to hear that. But what if we won? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that we did win. How did that happen? And how can we work towards that? And that's been a fundamental part of my life, even through really challenging times.
Well, there's been amazing things that you've done, that you've won. How many times I'm sure someone said, oh, well, could you have a president come to one of your events? Could you have the Pope come to Philadelphia? That'll never happen. How are you going to, buy a newspaper? Okay. Bringing the World Cup to Philadelphia. All these things that you've been involved with, and these are things that like most people have been like, yeah, that's impossible. Like, how did you actually make these things happen?
It's funny. I've met two popes, and I haven't met the one from Villanova yet, so that'll be soon. I've met every president since Richard Nixon. When I first met Nixon, I was 12 years old on a school trip down to Washington, D.C., and happenstance, he was walking from the Capitol to get into his car. He had a can of V8 tomato juice that was empty on the floor of the thing. I remember looking in the car. But anyway, so it's just, getting out there, meeting people and seeing things and again, just dreaming, being practical, but just kind of dreaming what might kind of be able to happen. And a lot of people, when I've been able to start and then purchase and then grow and then sell 3 advertising agencies to publicly traded companies. And these were, the one particular agency was really struggling when I got in there. And I thought, okay, I'm not an advertising man. I'm more of a public relations messaging person, but let's figure this out. And they wanted to hire me, and I said, would you sell it instead? And the guy who I was dealing with in New York said, Brian, we lost $1 million last year. It's going to lose more money now. You'd be great to run it. It makes no sense to try to buy it. So I went back to them the next day and I said, how about if you credit me 50 cents on every dollar of profit I can make for you towards this purchase price of $4.5 million, which we know it's not worth, but that's your losses on the books. And give me 3 years to do it. And he said, I think you're a fool to do it, but if that's what you want to do. And long story short, I was able to get great creative talent. I was able to recruit a guy named Rich Russo, who was Donnie Deutsch's creative director, who at first didn't even want to meet me in public, but was willing to have breakfast in my hotel room. And then we met, we really hit it off, and he's now the CEO of Arnold Advertising in New York. And by bringing him in and others, we grew it from about 50 people to more than 200 people, and I earned it out in 3 years. And then they asked me they bought it back from me, and I stayed another 5. And that's just an example. And then also, I've had other experiences too. You guys were involved too with Nutrisystem. I mean, I was the longest serving member of the board there. We took it from 72 cents a share to finally sold it at $42. But it was Mike Hagan's leadership and what he was able to do and just kind of thinking about things. I love working around smart people because I learn from them too, which is fantastic. I'm constantly observing and learning. And one final thing I'll say in this area is to try new ways to do things. Like I literally will drive different ways home sometimes just to see what it's like if I take this road versus the one I always take. And I read things that, a little old school in that I'm online constantly, but I also read physical papers, particularly on the weekends. And I'll have the New York Times and the FT and the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Wall Street Journal. And I can't tell you how often somebody says, well, how do you know that? And I read the paper because I wouldn't read online. The algorithm's not going to feed me fashion articles, but I might read something as I turn a page of a fashion article, and there's something that could be applicable to a healthcare client as well. Some aspect of that could maybe make sense if we did it this way. And I loved it. One last thing in this way, I had a client about a year ago. You know him, I won't mention his name, but a CEO of a major operation. And we get together every 2 months or so, talk about the business, but also just some ideas. And he left my office and I got a quote, is everything all right? Yeah, just got a quick question for you, Brian. What's that? Where do you get all these great ideas? I leave your office so pumped up and optimistic. And that was just like, dear diary, today was a particularly wonderful conversation I had. So anyway, it's that sort of thing. Let's talk about what can happen. We can win. What do we need to do it? And get the negative people kind of, I've found sometimes negative folks, as you win, get more negative because they're getting proven wrong. And, you just have to, you have to sometimes make some tough decisions that way.